Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell says he expects the Senate to vote Wednesday on a new assistance package for Ukraine. The Kentucky Republican led 3 other GOP senators on a visit to Kyiv Saturday. They met with Ukrainian President Zelensky, and afterward, McConnell called the Ukrainian people an inspiration. Meanwhile, Ukrainian officials say they are negotiating to try and rescue 60 severely wounded people from the steel plant in the besieged port city of Mariupol. About 600 injured people are still inside the complex, according to a regional police officer. CBS News foreign correspondent Charlie Daggett joins me now from Vinnytsia, Ukraine. Charlie, good to see you. So Russian troops are withdrawing from Kharkiv, Ukraine's second largest city. Explain to us all the significance of what appears to be a Ukrainian victory there.
It's hard to overestimate just how significant that victory is. The Russian military has had its eyes on Kharkiv, Ukraine's second largest city, since this invasion began. We remember they tried to take the capital, Kyiv, but they were outstretched in that region trying to take over that capital. They didn't have the supply routes. Kharkiv is roughly 30 to 40 miles from the Russian border itself. So you would have had good resupply routes, you would have had good weaponry, you would have had support from Russia itself. So it is a significant step forward in terms of morale. The Ukrainians were never going to give up Kharkiv, but the Russians not only failed to encircle the city, which is what they had been trying to do, but to seize it. So it is important in terms of morale, in terms of pushing Russian forces all the way back outside of Kharkiv, almost to the Russian border in places. Secondly, it is a tactical victory, and the reason why, again, those resupply routes. If the Russians had managed to take Kharkiv, or even the region around Kharkiv, it would have enabled them to push forces, military hardware, the things that are important like fuel, food, keeping the troops fed, keeping a resupply of fresh troops, getting them out if they've been in the middle of a battle, being able to get more forces in there. All of that has now been cut off to the Donbass region, a little bit further south, which is where the Russians are now concentrating their effort in trying to defeat Ukrainian forces.
That's exactly what I wanted to ask you next, Charlie, because the fighting has been very different further south in the eastern part of the Donbass region. You've traveled to villages and towns along the front line there. Tell us what you've seen.
Yes, all over the front line in these frontline villages. And yes, I know that there's been a lot of confident talk from NATO partners and from the Ukrainian military about how successful the Ukrainian military has been in the battlefields, especially around places like Kharkiv. But what we've witnessed in that Donbass region where the Russians are really concentrating their firepower, they are hitting these frontline towns with artillery and airstrikes, and in some cases, just flattening them. Yes, they are making incremental advances, according to a British military intelligence report this week, that they haven't really achieved the kind of goals that they would have wanted to achieve. That doesn't mean that they're not achieving them. It's just going very, very slowly. So where the Ukrainian forces are putting up a fight and digging in, they are able to hold back the worst of the Russian advances, but the Russians are still advancing. Essentially, what they're trying to do is try to chip away at this Ukrainian defense line and find a vulnerable position in order to push through. But it is happening. And the terrible thing, as we've witnessed for ourselves, is because they are using things like airstrikes and long-range artillery, they are just hammering and smashing some of these civilian areas and residential neighborhoods. Civilians are getting killed. They're spreading terror. Civilians are trying to rush out of that area as fast as they can. But when you see some people that are, not well enough to travel, or the elderly, they are stuck there. They're hunkered down. They're terrified. And these places really are taking a hammering. And I have to say, we've spoken to Ukrainian forces. They're getting hammered, too. So the Ukrainians have been very successful in certain parts of the region, but when it comes to the Donbass itself, some of the best fighting forces, people who have been fighting Russian separatists since 2015, are under threat of being overwhelmed and encircled by Russian forces who are trying to sort of have this pincher movement, this pincher offensive, and it is a war of attrition, and they're there for the long run. And the Russians have the upper hand because they have better artillery, and they have more ammunition, and they have more resources, and they have more troops to pour into that area. So that fight is raging, and it is going to continue.
All right. Thanks for keeping an eye on all of it for us, Charlie. Thanks.
Thank you.